From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
U.S. unemployment hits an almost 3-year high, sparking the worst day of a jobs day for the S&P in 2 years and fueling bets on more aggressive Fed cuts this fall. We'll have more with former White House Deputy National Economic Council Director Bharat Ramamurti.
Plus, we'll look at what the growth scare means for Vice President Harris's campaign as she officially secures enough delegates in an ongoing virtual roll call to become the Democratic nominee, just after announcing a massive $310 million fundraising haul from July.
And this with her decision on a running mate expected just days from now. Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California and our political panel will weigh in on all of it this hour. Happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday, Joe. And of course, not just any Friday. It was a jobs day. I'm not sure it was happy for those who were along the equity market, however, because you're getting softer data, and it was a doozy of a day on Wall Street.
Yeah, well, we could use your optimism on this Friday as we head into the weekend here, because indeed, the conversation has shifted dramatically from whether we're in a soft landing to, in fact, a hard one, and whether the Federal Reserve missed the opportunity to cut interest rates following this softer than expected jobs report, which we talked about earlier today with the acting Secretary of Labor, Julie Su.
We continue, know that there's continued work left to do to make sure that we maintain a strong economy. But we're still at a 3-month average of above the number that President Biden said a year ago we need to be to have a sustainable, strong labor market in a strong economy.
Joining us now for more is Bloomberg Economics U.S. economist Estelle O. So, Estelle, we have seen Wall Street economists come out today saying 50 basis points in September, perhaps 50 basis points again in November. Even over at J.P. Morgan, they suggested it might be possible that the Fed cuts before the September meeting. What's most likely here, given the data we're seeing?
Right now, most likely is probably still 25 basis point cuts, but market's concerns and reaction is definitely warranted. I'll say the only reason that we're mostly still looking for a 25 basis point cut is because during the FOMC meeting earlier this week, Fed Chair Powell, when he was asked about a 50 basis point cut, he said, it's undecided, he's non-committal, but his body language really said that he didn't want to go 50. And an intermediate policy meeting, we actually think it's appropriate, but we don't think the Fed's actually going to do it. Intermeeting policy updates are reserved for emergency situations. So we had one, when COVID happened. Right. Usually the Fed reserves that for, when there's actually a need to not scare markets, but there's actual need.
It's been a long time since we've had one of those.
That's right.
I have to admit, isn't this exactly the conversation that Jay Powell wanted? The final capitulation, the idea that maybe they missed it, it's too much, we're giving up on this idea of a soft landing. That is precisely the mentality, the psychology in the market that he was going for, isn't it?
That's right. So if you listen to him earlier this week, he basically noted that they had active discussions about a policy rate cut at the July meeting. Obviously, some FOMC members were still on the more dovish side. They didn't feel comfortable with the inflation side of the mandate, but the conversation was there. He struck a very much more dovish tone during his press conference compared with the policy statement. And we think that's mainly a reflection of the fact that he is very much looking at the labor market, very much concerned with a deterioration that's about to happen. And I think this is it. This is the jobs print that is probably going to push some of his more conservative, cautious FOMC members onto his side.
Yeah.
Well, something that we heard the chairman talk about at the meeting he was asked about was the idea that we know tighter policy has a lagged effect. It takes a while for it to fully kick in. But isn't it the same on the way back down? If we're looking at a 4.3% unemployment rate now, how much higher could it go before the effects of easier policy kicks in to help save the labor market?
That's right. We're actually expecting a lagged effect, even though we do expect the Fed to cut in 25 basis points in September, and also furthermore in later this year and also in 2025, we still expect the unemployment rate to rise to 5%. And that's partially the lagged effect that you're talking about here, Kylie. It's going to take a while. There's lagged effects on the way up. There's lag effects on the way down.
We talked to Austin Goolsbee earlier today on Bloomberg TV and radio. He tried to make the point that the Fed will not be overreacting to 1 month's data. But is this not a trend?
That's right. That's exactly what I was going to say. So you've had 3 months of rising unemployment rates. You went from 4 to 4.1, now 4.3. 3 months is the trend, Joe. And the Fed definitely does not ever react to just 1 month's data prints. Sure. It looks at information from a very long-term perspective. And there are a lot of really smart Fed economists at the Fed right now who are looking at, 6 month period measurements, 9 month period measures of the unemployment rate, unemployment flows. We ourselves look at the 6 month measure of people going into unemployment compared to the people transitioning out. And now that is at a very high level right now. Right now, there's 3.4 million people transitioning into unemployment versus only 3.2 million transitioning out. Wow. Now, the last time that was that high was, pandemic, and prior to that, it was actually during the 2000 period recession.
Not the comparisons that we want. A precarious moment with Bloomberg's Estelle O. Estelle, thank you for joining us at the table as we turn our attention to the presidential campaign, where, of course, the issues of the economy have an important impact here. Kamala Harris's team, all the while announcing a monster fundraising haul, more than $300 million, $310 million for the month of July. This is a campaign only a few weeks old. Harris securing as well, to make it official today, the Democratic nomination for president in a virtual roll call that is still ongoing at this moment. We bring in Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian for more on the state of the campaign here. Jordan, put in perspective these massive numbers.
Well, it's more than twice as much as Donald Trump took in that same period. And so that's a reflection of the momentum that Kamala Harris has captured on the Democratic side since that switch happened at the top of the ticket. And it's going to give her a boost that she needs. I mean, as she says on the campaign trail, they still see themselves as the underdogs. So that means they need a lot of money to set up operations in battleground states and also launch an advertising campaign to counter this massive Republican effort that's been underway to define her as this West Coast liberal. You've seen a ton of advertising from Republicans on that front. So they need that money to counteract that.
Yeah.
Well, as we consider the Republicans, and one Republican in particular, Donald Trump, he was on Fox Business earlier today and was asked about whether or not he was going to actually debate Vice President Harris.
Are you going to debate her?
Well, I want to. We're leading in the polls, it seems, by quite a bit still. She's better than he is, but I think ultimately she'll be worse than him. She's more radical than him.
Now, of course, we should all keep in mind that Donald Trump had suggested earlier in this campaign he was willing to debate anytime, anywhere, any place. Is this going to happen on September 10th, Jordan?
Remains to be seen. I mean, seems to be trying to back out of it, right? And this is the strategy he used during the primaries to great effect. I mean, he refused to debate Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley and that roster of Republicans who he just swiftly, dealt away with. And maybe he's thinking, I could pull off the same thing in the general election. That's a risky proposition. This is a much closer race in the general election than that primary race was, where he really had command of the party. And he's also sacrificing what is probably going to be his biggest television audience before Election Day if he doesn't participate in that debate. But, I mean, the risks for him. I mean, look what he did at the National Association of Black Journalists, calling into question Kamala Harris's racial identity. If messages like that are broadcast to tens of millions of Americans, that could prove pretty damaging to Donald Trump.
So what is it that draws him to the stage? Is it this approach we're seeing from the Harris campaign, trying to call him a chicken, try to dare him to show up? Or is it, in fact, where the polls will stand when we walk into September?
Well, the Harris campaign certainly seems to be playing into all of Donald Trump's personal, weak spots, vulnerabilities, whatever you want to call them, masculinity, ego, right. All those things. And so maybe they think they can goad him onto the stage. Look, Trump was displaying something of discipline on the Trump scale before Kamala Harris's entry into the race, especially after his assassination attempt. That's all gone out the window. So it seems to be back to impulsive Trump, and that's always an unpredictable proposition. So it's always hard to tell, like, if he's actually going to be on that stage in just over a month here.
Indeed. All right, Bloomberg's Jordan Fabian, thank you so much for joining us, especially today as Jordan gets ready to leave us for a few months and go on parental leave. His family's growing a little bit bigger, and we wish you all well. Now, still ahead, we'll take a closer look at today's jobs numbers with Bharat Ramamurti, former White House Deputy National Economic Council Director. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
This is the first time that I have a growth scare. In the past, I kept on saying there's no reason for the U.S. to fall into recession. I think people underestimated the lagged effects of higher interest rates, and these are hitting in a much bigger way now.
That was Bloomberg opinion columnist Mohammed Al-Arian reacting to the weaker than expected July jobs report we got this morning. And joining us now for more on Bloomberg TV and Radio is Bharat Ramamurti, Senior Advisor for Economic Strategy at the American Economic Liberties Project. Bharat, welcome back to Balance of Power. It's always great to have you, but especially on a jobs day like this one. We're now looking at an unemployment rate of 4.3%. Are we all about to find out in short order that this landing was in fact hard?
I think we should take a little bit of a breath here and look at the data over a longer period of time. If you look at the 3-month average of job growth, it's still fairly solid for this stage of the cycle. Actually, we gained more jobs this July than we did in July of 2018 and July of 2019, to put that in perspective. And if you look at some of the underlying numbers like consumer spending and business investment, it's still a pretty good signs. Obviously got a good productivity number this week as well. So I don't think it's time to hit the panic button yet, but at the same time, and I've been saying this now for a few weeks, I think the Fed is behind the curve. I think they missed an opportunity to start cutting rates in July. I think that was pretty clearly a mistake given the information we got today. And I think that they need to move quickly to rectify that mistake, including by considering a 50 basis point or even more of a cut in September.
Well, it's interesting. We spoke earlier today with Austin Goolsbee, the Chicago Fed president, of course, and he had this reaction when it comes to the role of the central bank and rate cuts earlier today on Bloomberg. Let's hear what he said, and we'll have you respond.
We'd never want to overreact to any 1 month's numbers. And if you back up to the last half of 2023, you know that the market said maybe there would be 7 cuts for the year. And then when a month would come in, then that 7 would drop to 3. Then there was a group saying maybe there will be an increase in rates. The job of the central bank is to figure out the through line and to move in a steady way.
Bharat, we're all struck by the speed with which this narrative has changed, going from the idea of mission accomplished on a soft landing to a true growth scare, as Mohammed Al-Arian said before. So I know you think the Fed should have cut rates already, but isn't this the Fed doing its job to reach the point of capitulation where the psychology actually changes and the market doesn't think it's smarter than the central bank?
Look, I think they achieved that a while back, honestly. And I think that I agree with what President Goolsbee was saying there. It's important for the Fed to be data-driven and to act in a measured way. I think that starting to cut in July would have been the measured approach. You can do an initial cut in July, follow that up with an additional cut in September. It looks like a normal rate-cutting cycle. Now I think that they're behind the 8 ball a little bit and maybe need to react more quickly in September by doing a larger cut. But to Austin's larger point there, it's certainly true that people who have been prognosticating about an imminent recession for the U.S. economy for a long time, and I remember in 2022 when I was in the White House, you good folks at Bloomberg did a story saying that 100% of economists thought that a recession was guaranteed within 1 year. And of course, that didn't happen. So people have been predicting doom and gloom for the U.S. economy for a long time, and they've been proven wrong throughout that. That doesn't mean we should be cavalier with the risks, but it also means that we should have some amount of faith in the underlying strength of the economy.
Well, Bharat, we've been having conversations in recent weeks, especially in the aftermath of Chairman Powell's testimony on Capitol Hill earlier this summer, about the political complication of an election on November 5th and a potential rate cut in mid-September. If we're talking here, as I think you're alluding to, a full 50 basis points, how is that going to go down politically? I know the Fed says it's independent, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Well, I think that number one, as you said, the Fed is independent, and the political implications of what it does or doesn't do should not be a consideration for the Fed, and I'm confident that it's not. I think that they are trying to be data-driven and act accordingly. That said, I think that the moment that the Fed begins to cut rates, I think will be the moment that the American public at large says, inflation is now behind us and we've won. And so I do think it'll be a big moment politically and an opportunity for Vice President Harris, if and when that cut comes in September, to talk a little bit about the trajectory of the recovery that we've been on over the last few years under the Biden-Harris administration and what her plans would be to build on that recovery. And I should note, by the way, that it's also a contrast. People in November are going to have a choice of two different paths. And the Trump path is a very dangerous one. Again, if you look at what economists are saying across the political spectrum, Wall Street Journal had an article on this just a couple weeks ago. The Trump agenda is fundamentally very inflationary. You look at a massive $4.6 trillion tax cut primarily for the wealthy, an additional 10% across the board tariff that's functionally like a national sales tax on everything from groceries to coffee to T-shirts to shoes. The combination of those factors is going to be inflationary. And I think the last thing that the American people are going to want after we've essentially conquered inflation is the chances of reigniting inflation with a Trump victory in November.
Bharat, where's the job market going to be when the Fed finally cuts in September?
Look, I think that there's reasons to look at the jobs data from today and think that it's a little bit overstated and a little bit of an outlier. Obviously, you had, like I said, a stronger job growth this July than you did in July 2018 and July 2019. There's something a little quirky about July's going back historically. Obviously, you had the impact, which is not a large impact, but some impact from bad weather and temporary layoffs because of that. So I think we should take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. I wouldn't be all that surprised if we see a little bit of a bounce back with the data for August. So I think that we're not on the precipice of disaster, but I think it's very, very clearly the case that the Fed should have begun cutting, and it must react quickly to begin cutting more aggressively come September. As you said at the beginning of the segment, there are some long and variable lags, as they say, about monetary policy. And it's quite clear that the interest rate hikes from the past couple of years are really starting to bite now. Inflation is coming down. All of the signs in the job market are pointing to some level of weakening. And when you look at the balance of risks, which is what the Fed is supposed to do, I think they tilt quite clearly in favor of beginning to cut.
Well, Bharat, before we let you go, given that you did have a role in this administration, it is worth noting that up until 2 weeks ago, we were seeing Republicans attacking President Biden when it came to Bidenomics. Now I'm just scrolling through X and see a post from House GOP talking about how Kamalanomics continues to fail the American people. As she now campaigns and is at this point the Democratic nominee, how does she sell Kamalanomics?
Well, again, look, as I said earlier, there's a choice between two pathways here. The Trump pathway, as I said, is clearly inflationary. And I don't think people are going to be extremely excited about the idea of interest rates going back up and inflation reigniting just so that a millionaire can get an average tax cut of $70,000 a year, which is what the Trump plan would do. The Harris plan, which is the Biden plan originally, is to bring down the deficit by $2 trillion over the next 10 years. By doing some targeted tax increases on the very wealthy and on large corporations, and then to address some of the cost of living issues that people have been struggling with for the past few years, frankly, for the past few decades. Childcare, housing, the cost of transportation, the cost of higher education. Those are the two divergent paths that people are facing in November. And I think quite clearly, both on the economic merits and on the political appeal, the Harris path is superior.
Bharat, it's good to have you back. Thanks for sharing your insights with us. Bharat Ramamurti, Senior Advisor for Economic Strategy at the American Economics Liberty Project. Great to have you back on Balance of Power. So now we have Bidenomics, Trumponomics, and Kamalanomics.
That's
Did I
right.
say that right? I'm going to have to work on that. Coming up, stocks crushed. Bond yields tumbled today following that jobs data. We'll wrap the week in markets coming up next. Bloomberg's Emily Graffeo will be with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lines in Washington, where we're also balancing business and politics today with a real collision following this morning's jobs report that disappointed the markets, pulled stocks lower, pulled bond yields lower. We want to bring in Bloomberg's Emily Graffeo for more on this. Emily, this was across the board.
Yeah, I mean, every asset class, there was basically nowhere to hide today. That's at least what one trader told me. You look at volatility, the VIX index spiked to the highest level in 2 years. Treasury yields were tumbling as investors were pricing in a more aggressive Federal Reserve. And then for the stock market, it was actually the worst day for the S&P 500 in over 2 years, at least the S&P 500 performance on a jobs day. You look at the NASDAQ 100, it fell over 10% since its peak. It's now technically in correction territory. And I think that really underscores that there was nowhere to hide. That safe haven bid that traders were kind of hiding in earlier in the spring. Oh, I'll buy NVIDIA. Nothing else is working. That didn't even work today because people were really nervous about this growth scare that took people off guard.
Well, especially in tech, Emily, to what extent do we attribute this to a kind of sell everything, we're worried about a recession, repricing the Fed? And to what extent was it also the fact that we had a boatload of big tech earnings after the bell yesterday, and those were collapsing, Intel especially?
It was a little bit of both. I mean, the earnings that were weaker didn't really help. You did see Apple higher today, but at least across the board, the NASDAQ 100, again, just didn't work as that safe haven. I mean, speaking to traders today, some people were convinced that it was a market overreaction, that we have so much data to get through before Jackson Hole, before the next Fed meeting. We'll see this quickly reverse, but that doesn't make trading days like today any easier. And then other people were pointing to the fact that the unemployment rate was accelerating much quicker than previously had expected. The revisions were bad when you look at the jobs numbers from prior months, and the actual payroll print that we got on Friday was much less than economists were expecting.
So we're back to bad news actually being bad news on Wall Street. In our remaining moment here, Emily, there are a lot of broken charts out there. Where are we from a technical standpoint after today?
NASDAQ 100 in a correction, the VIX volatility index spiking. Really, the question is this a harbinger of what's to come, the time in between now and the next Fed meeting? Are we going to see these days where we see 30 basis point moves in the 2-year, or are we going to see people buying the dip in the future? And today was an overreaction. That's really what I'm going to be watching.
All right, well, we'll all buckle our seatbelts for Monday. Bloomberg's Emily Graffeo, thank you so much. Now, still ahead, we'll be joined by Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California, who will weigh in on Kamala Harris's potential VP picks, as she has a choice to make in the next few days. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We can certainly see that Israel's doing what they said they were going to do, which is defeat Hamas, and that is what the attack in Tehran showcased. Is that they took the steps to take out a major leader in the Hamas enterprise, but we still want to get those hostages home.
Democratic Congresswoman Haley Stevens of Michigan, who co-chairs the House Hostage Task Force, talking with us yesterday on Balance of Power following news of the prison swap. Joining us, Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California. Congressman, it's good to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg. I want to ask you about foreign policy from your view on the Armed Services Committee and with your experience in geopolitics. But I want to ask you by way of the now Kamala Harris campaign. Just within a couple of days, John Kirby said at the White House that there was no sunlight between Joe Biden and Kamala Harris when it comes to policy on Israel, something that we were talking about there with Haley Stevens. And I wonder if you see that being the case, as members of the progressive left seem to think Kamala Harris is somehow more sympathetic, more empathetic to the Palestinians suffering in Gaza. How do you see it?
I think she and President Biden are absolutely in the same place. I don't know of any person in high government office that has more empathy and concern about individuals than President Biden, unless that be Kamala Harris. They are really in lockstep with regard to the concerns that all of us have about the extraordinary damage and deaths that have occurred in Gaza. However, both of them have been very, very clear, as am I, that we support Israel. We've been there since the 40s, and we, in this nation, must continue to support Israel. That doesn't mean that we support everything Israel does. And I, along with many others, are very, very concerned about the way they've conducted this war. And therefore, the effort that's been made by President Biden, along with Harris, to move to a ceasefire, a permanent ceasefire in which the hostages are returned and a stable government is in place in Gaza.
Yeah, well, Congressman, on that note, of course, we have seen those efforts underway for months now. But given what has happened within just the last week, with Israel going after targets, Hezbollah commander near Beirut, and Hamas's political leader who was at that negotiating table taken out in Iranian territory, Iran now vowing retaliation, what does that actually do to the prospect of a ceasefire agreement?
Well, it ultimately may prove to be beneficial. It is a big question about whether any of the countries in that area want to have an all-out war. It's not unusual that when things get really, really bad, that steps are taken to back it down. Let's hope that's the case right now. However, there's plenty of historic evidence that we may see increased attacks by Hezbollah, as well as Iran and its proxies taking additional steps. Certainly, we've seen that with the Houthis, who were, prior to this Gaza war, not really engaged. But let's hope for the best here. I certainly know that the administration is doing two things simultaneously. One, they are moving our military assets, the warships, the planes, and the other assets into the area should there be a significant or serious attack on Israel. And secondly, there is an all-out diplomatic effort underway to try to move this, ratchet it down, and to move on with the ceasefire, the release of the hostages, and to bring stability to Gaza, stability in a way that is not a threat to Israel, and beneficial to the Palestinians in that area.
Congressman, I want to pull you back into the campaign for a moment, as Kamala Harris now officially has the delegates required to be the Democratic nominee, as we know from that virtual roll call earlier today. You're a Democrat from California. You have spent more time and have more experience with Kamala Harris than more people likely will ever have. And I want to ask you about the conversation that's being had right now, thanks to Donald Trump, about her racial identity. Democratic Congresswoman Gwen Moore, your colleague from Wisconsin, talked to us about Donald Trump's comments about Harris's race before the National Association of Black Journalists. Here's what she said.
I think Donald Trump, we have to give him credit for really hitting all of his messaging points to keep people in fear of losing their jobs because of, the immigrants are overrunning the border and taking black jobs. I don't think anybody's minds were changed, and I think black voters who saw it probably that increased their resolve to vote for Kamala Harris.
Congressman, can you believe we're talking about this in 2024?
We should not be, but we also know Donald Trump. Donald Trump has always been on the edge of racism throughout his entire career, going way back to lawsuits that were filed against him before he ever became a TV personality. So this has always been a part of his life. And he uses race for multiple reasons over time. And this most recent episode follows a long, long history of it, giving one more reason why he must never be president. We are a multiracial, mixed race country. There's 350 to 400 million of us, depending how you want to count it. And we are the entire world. The entire world lives in America. And we have to learn to live together and Trump is a disruptor. The word weird is certainly applicable, but in this situation, it is insufficient to actually explain how divisive and how troublesome and dangerous he is in the campaign, let alone in office.
Well, Congressman, when he's not specifically talking about the racial identity of the vice president, he and others in his orbit, including J.D. Vance and your colleagues across the aisle in the House, have been going after her specifically on the issue of the border. What is the best way for her to counter that? And do you think selecting Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona could be one of those ways to do so?
Well, first of all, let me say Mark Kelly is an exceptional person. I was working with him yesterday on a national maritime strategy to rebuild our maritime industry, which has all but disappeared. He's also a hero, an astronaut, and he understands the military and he understands national security issues. He would be an excellent choice, in my view, and he also from a border state, and he knows the difficulties, he knows the opportunities and the challenges that the border presents. Now, with regard to Harris, she was given a specific task, not the border czar, but she was given a specific task to deal with 3 countries in Central America, which at the outset of the Biden administration was the location from which most of the asylum seekers were coming. She managed in the 2 to 3 years to bring in $5 billion of investment. And today, those 3 countries have a very low number of citizens from their country that are working their way into America as asylum seekers or illegals. Most of the asylum seekers are coming from other countries. She should, in dealing with this, toss the issue right back onto the Republicans' lap. There was a significant, very valuable, very useful, very powerful immigration bill that was put together in the Senate that had bipartisan support, was on its way to be passed until Donald Trump contacted Mike Johnson and the Republicans in the House and said, kill it. I need this issue. Kill that bill. And of course, the Republicans did as they were told to do. They killed it. But it is still sitting there in the Senate, and it could become law, providing, I think, 3,000 border security officers, creating a very significant mechanism to deal with the current asylum seekers so that their cases can be adjudicated in a very rapid way, not over the years that are presently required for lack of personnel. And it also provided for additional border security, requiring that all asylum seekers come through the ports of entry and not cross illegally across the border. If they do so, back they go. They don't get asylum. So it's a very, very good bill. So
we covered it quite a bit in process for our viewers and listeners, Congressman. I'm out of time, but I'll ask you this before you leave us. Should Kamala Harris go to the border with her running mate once he or she is chosen?
I'm unaware. I don't know the answer.
Thanks for being with us, as always, Congressman.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time, sir. That's Democratic Congressman John Garamendi of California. Thank you so much and have a great weekend. But still ahead, before we start our weekend, our closers will join us to talk more about the potential political impact of the weak jobs report we got today. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
People continue to be frustrated with those kitchen table issues, and that's what I'm still focused on, and I think that's what most Americans are focused on. When Americans are telling me, Iowans are telling me they're frustrated about their utility bills and their inflation that they've seen in the grocery store, I tell them, hey, if you think Bidenomics is bad, wait till you see Harris's version.
That was Republican Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa speaking with us here on Balance of Power yesterday, ahead of the jobs report we got today, which, of course, was not a good one, about how a Harris presidency may impact the economy relative to a Biden one. This comes as the unemployment rate hit an almost 3-year high and interest rates are still uncut. So joining us now for more on the political implications is our political panel. Rick Davis of Stonecourt Capital and Jeanne Zaino, political science professor at Iona University and senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. So Jeanne, just scrolling through Twitter today, forget Bidenomics, I'm seeing a lot about Kamalanomics. It doesn't seem like the data is working well for the woman who is effectively the incumbent here.
No, it certainly is not. Kamalanomics, is very good, Kaylee. I can't get it to roll off my tongue the way Bidenomics did. But it is not good. And we heard, you just played a clip. We heard Rick Scott today, Jason Smith, many others, to your point, on Twitter or X, tying Kamala Harris to this bad jobs report. I don't think this is a surprise. When you look at the polls, just the latest Wall Street Journal poll, Donald Trump is up 12 points on the economy. People are very concerned. It's the #1 issue. This was always going to be a drag for the Democrats. People are in a very sour mood about inflation, cost of living. The one bright spot potentially is that maybe having Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket gives them some room maybe to distance themselves a tiny bit. But it's going to be tough. It's a challenge. There's no easy way for the campaign to deal with this. And they've always known it's going to be an issue. That's why most of these early advertisements focusing on the economy.
Just what the world needs, Rick, is another form of economics that no one can identify. So here we have Kamalanomics. How much is timing and the trajectory of this economy going to determine the outcome of this election?
I think obviously the economy is the #1 issue. We see it over and over again in all the swing state polls, all the national polls. I think only Arizona has the border as the #1 issue outside of all of the swing states. So it's front and center for every voter in this election cycle. And I think that, as Jeanne says, that Kamala Harris has a chance to sort of differentiate herself from the Biden administration's handling of the economy, which uniformly by voters is negative. So maybe opportunities like this are when she needs to speak out and say, I've got a vision for how to bring this economy under my leadership. And at the same time, I think a little, political jujitsu is inappropriate here, because Donald Trump claims when the market goes up, it's because people expect him to be, right, the next president. Well, maybe she needs to say, Donald, what goes up must come down.
Well, certainly we saw that today in a very real way. But, Rick, there's some things we have yet to see, including Kamala Harris taking the stage in Philadelphia on Tuesday with whoever her running mate is going to be. We understand that there is a short list, and we heard from someone who's on that list. Democratic Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona had this to say about her chances of beating Trump earlier today.
I think the good news for the American people is Kamala Harris is going to beat him in a debate, and is going to beat him on November 5th, and is going to be our next president.
The jury's out on the debate thing, and we'll have more on that in just a moment. But on Senator Kelly or Governor Shapiro, even Governor Shapiro or Walz, who all seem Bashir and Walz, who all seem to be in the mix here. Mm-hmm. Is this a re-widening of the list so that it feels like more of a surprise when she eventually picks someone who was on that really short list next week?
Yeah, as someone who's gone through this, there is an element of torture that you tend to have to employ because it keeps us talking, right? I mean, the last thing the campaign wants is us blowing their surprise over the weekend when it doesn't have that much attention. And so you do walk people out, to indicate that, oh, I just had a conversation with the vice president. Maybe I'm more higher up on that list than I thought I was. We would do that pretty regularly throughout, my experience in presidential politics, just to keep us from actually zeroing in on who we think the actual candidate will be. But I think it still revolves around the same short list that we've been hearing from time to time. But nobody will know until they show up on that stage.
God knows. Does it matter at this point, Jeanne? Is there enough difference between the few names we're talking about?
I think it matters more. All the people on this list, whether it's the short list or the longer of the list, are very qualified and bring a lot to the ticket. I think it does matter in terms of, if she really feels she needs a Pennsylvania and she doesn't go with Shapiro, does that cost her Pennsylvania? I'm not sure that that would be the case, but the reality is it's the first time the American public is going to see her executive decision-making skills, if you will, at work. So from that perspective, I think it does matter. And you know, I do think there is an element here of she does want to be comfortable with whoever it is that she does pick. So this weekend, and I hope she takes her time and doesn't announce it until at least next week for your sakes, that this weekend is important because she does get to spend time with them. And what the campaign says is that's going to play big on her decision. And nobody knows what it's like to be vice president more than Kamala Harris, who has been at it for 3 years now.
Jeanne, just quickly, we also heard from her campaign today that they raised $310 million in the month of July. How quickly and rapidly does she need to spend that, or should she sit on that for a while and wait until after the convention?
No, she doesn't have time. We're under 100 days now. They need to spend a lot on advertising, defining her, and reminding people what a Trump presidency would be like. And they've got to do that not just in the swing states, but it's going to be expensive to get out on TV, but also the digital space. So she needs to spend as much of that as she can, as quickly as she can.
All right. Somehow Jeanne doesn't think she's coming in this weekend if there's breaking news. We'll have to talk about that after. Our panel will stay with us as we turn our attention to former President Trump's most recent response to debating Vice President Harris. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I want to do a debate, but I also can say this. Everybody knows who I am, and now people know who she is.
Are you going to debate her?
Well, I want to. Right now, I say, why should I do a debate? I'm leading in the polls.
Donald Trump on Fox News earlier today commenting about whether or not he'll debate Vice President Harris, who has made it clear that she's ready to do this. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino are back with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Rick, this is interesting. The new criteria that we have here, everyone knows who we are. I'm leading in the polls. Why would we debate? Wasn't that the same scenario when he debated Joe Biden?
Yeah, and agreed to the September 10th debate.
Okay.
So come on, Don, give us some show. This is what you do.
I thought so.
We want to debate. It's an obligation to the people of America to be able to look at the two candidates that they're going to be having to choose from and see how they do with each other. I think it'd be spectacular.
Well, Jeanne, we've heard him not just talk about the polls, but also the venue when he's considering this decision whether or not to join Harris on that stage. ABC, he seems to have a problem with, perhaps more so after ABC's Rachel Scott moderated that conversation with him at the NABJ convention earlier this week. Would it be wise for Harris and her campaign to say, OK, we'll meet you on Fox then?
You know, I think it would be just for them to just say what she's been saying, which is that come say this all to my face. You talk about me a lot, meet me and say it to my face. Say it in the debate you promised to do. And if not, to your point, Kayleigh, come on Bloomberg and say it. And they can have a debate with you and Joe moderate.
Jeanne's got the right idea.
I like where that's going. The fact of the matter is, Donald Trump really is going to have trouble finding motivation unless he's lagging in the polls to walk back into the lion's den here, right? Surely his staff is telling him to slow his roll after the first debate.
Yeah, I think that'll be the driver for him is if he wakes up and it's, after Labor Day and all of a sudden, he can't see his way to 270 electoral votes, then it's like, call to the commission. Yeah. Hey, you guys, I forget all that nasty stuff I said about you. I'm willing to come to a debate. Yeah.
Well, if we do see a debate, I wonder, Jeanne, if Donald Trump will be asked to define what a black job is. We've heard from Simone Biles, the now 6 gold medal winning Olympic gymnast, who said she loves her black job. Do you think Simone Biles has the power to change minds in this election?
Yeah, I loved it. Of course, I loved watching Simone Biles. What an amazing performance yesterday. And, I think it does underscore and point people, because a lot of people even said to me, what is she talking about? And then they were pointed to Donald Trump's statement at the conference. I also would just add, turnabout is fair play. And I know it's J.D. Vance's 40th birthday today, so happy birthday, J.D. Vance. But we can't forget that when Simone Biles dropped out of the last Olympics due to health issues. He went on an interview and talked about the fact it's unfortunate that we are celebrating people for their weakness. And so I think Simone Biles, the greatest of all time, got back at the Trump dance team with her big smile and her goat pen.
Indeed. The GOAT has more events this weekend. I know we're all looking forward to watching her. Rick Davis and Jeanne Zaino, thank you so much. And of course, you can find more coverage in the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
They're the GOAT panel. Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.